Dust River sat low against the Texas horizon, a scatter of sun-baked buildings clinging to a half-dry riverbed, like a stubborn memory that refused to fade. From a distance, the town looked quiet, almost peaceful, but the kind of peace carried by wizard towns seldom came from harmony. More often, it was the hush that lingered after old wounds, after gun smoke, after all the noise had died and left people alone with what they feared most. It was late afternoon when the stagecoach rolled in, kicking up a tail of dust that hung behind it, like a ghost unwilling to be shaken off. Abigail Cross leaned forward in her seat, trying to catch her first proper glimpse of the place she'd chosen, perhaps foolishly, to begin her new chapter. Chicago had been loud, sharp, and ambitious. Dust River looked tired. But tired places carried stories, and stories were what she'd traveled nearly 1,000 miles to find. The coach jolted to a stop in front of the general store. Abigail stepped down carefully, adjusting her hat against the fierce sunlight. Her boots touched Texas soil for the first time, and a faint thrill ran through her. This was where she would write her new piece on frontier life, maybe something honest, something the East Coast newspapers rarely bothered printing. She'd brought notebooks, pencils, and a heart determined not to be pushed off course. "Abby?" The voice scraped across her nerves like a dull blade. She turned and felt her stomach sink. Hank Collier stood a few feet away, leaning against a hitch post, as though he'd been waiting all morning just to greet her. He was dressed in a crisp sheriff's coat, badge catching the sun like a wink from the devil himself. His hat sat low, shadowing eyes that once knew her too well, and never kindly. "Well, I'll be damned," Hank said with a grin that hadn't softened over the years. "Didn't expect to see you in this corner of God's country." Abigail tightened her grip on her satchel. "I could say the same. Dust River must have run out of decent lawmen." Hank chuckled, unoffended. "Still got that bite. I always liked that." "I'm not here for your liking, Hank." He raised a brow. "Course not. But seems fate's got a sense of humor." Abigail stepped away from him, refusing to let old ghosts dictate her first hour in town. But Hank followed with the lazy persistence of a man who believed the world owed him attention. "You planning to stay long?" he asked. "As long as my work requires." "And what kind of work would drag you out here?" "The kind that's none of your concern." She walked off before he could say more, though she felt his stare burning between her shoulder blades. Dust River suddenly seemed smaller, more suffocating. Running into Hank the first minute she arrived, if that wasn't a curse, she didn't know what was. She was halfway to the boarding house when she noticed a man standing by the old water tower, quiet as stone. He leaned on a long rifle, one boot hooked casually behind the other, a posture so still it was almost unnatural. His hair was long, black as obsidian, tied loosely behind his neck. His skin bore the copper tone of the high desert nations, and his eyes, deep set, unreadable, followed her with the calm awareness of someone who'd lived too long on the edge of danger. She recognized him from a sketch she'd seen in an old newspaper clipping. Jolan, the Apache who had saved Dust River from the Whitlock gang 3 years ago. The paper had called him a mercenary, a tracker, a renegade. Folks in the region called him something else, depending on who you asked. He was either a hero or a reminder of things they'd rather forget. Abigail approached with polite caution. "Excuse me, can you point me to the boarding house?" He lifted his chin toward a faded green building near the livery stable, next to the blacksmith shop. His voice was low, steady, like desert wind slipping through canyon stone. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, eyes narrowing slightly as they studied her. Not rudely, more like a man reading tracks in the sand, sorting danger from harmless curiosity. "You're new here," he said. "Yes," she replied. "Just arrived." "Then watch yourself. Dust River's quiet, but it ain't peaceful." Her lips curved despite herself. I figured as much on the right end. Jolan didn't smile back, but something in his expression eased. A respect, maybe, or simply acknowledgement. Name's Jolan, he added, jerking his head toward the riverbed. If you need the lay of the land, I can show you. Desert's easier with a guide. She hesitated, then nodded. I'd appreciate that. I'm writing a piece on frontier life. Accurate details matter. A flicker passed through his eyes, too fast to name. Then you'll get the truth, he said. Not the kind folks pretty up for tourists. Abigail found her footing, feeling steadier than she had since stepping off the coach. Before she could say more, Hank's voice cut across the street. Abby, you don't need to bother with him. I can show you around. Jolan's posture straightened, not aggressive but alert. Abigail turned just enough for Hank to see her expression. No, thank you. I'd prefer someone who knows the land instead of someone who just likes hearing himself talk. Hank's jaw tightened. The grin slipped, replaced by something darker, something that remembered rejection all too well. But Jolan simply looked at her with the faintest spark of respect, then pushed off the water tower. Tomorrow morning, he said. Sunrise. Meet at the old bridge if you still want that tour. I will, she replied. As he walked away, Abigail felt dust rivers shift around her, not yet danger, but the hint of coming storms. The dry wind picked up, sweeping grit across her boots, carrying the scent of heat, iron, and something else she couldn't quite name. This town might have been worn thin by the years, but it wasn't done telling stories. And she wasn't done listening. The Dust River Saloon was the kind of place where stories fermented faster than the whiskey. Lanterns glowed low behind stained glass, catching dust motes that drifted like tiny ghosts in the air. By dusk, the place was crowded ranch hands fresh off the range, gamblers clinging to luck, women in faded tartan skirts humming a tired tune. People here came to forget, though most left remembering more than they wished. Jolan stepped inside quietly, the way a man does who knows eyes will follow him. He wasn't wrong. Conversations paused briefly, like a breath held too long. Then the noise picked up again, a little too loud, a little too forced. He'd grown used to it. Gratitude mixed with fear had a strange way of twisting people's manners. He approached the counter, hat low, rifle slung behind him, placing a small pouch of coins on the scarred wooden bar. Coffee, and some dried beef if you've got it, he said. The barkeep nodded, an older man with the type of gaze that saw plenty but judged little. Coming right up, Jolan. Behind him, chairs scraped, boots shuffled. That shift in a room's air that told him trouble wasn't far away. Hank Collier walked in. His badge glinted sharply under the lanterns, as though it demanded attention. A few men straightened in their seats, the reflex of folks trained to fear authority, even when it didn't deserve respect. Hank swaggered toward the counter, the smell of whiskey clinging to him like a borrowed coat. Well, if it ain't Dust River's tame Apache, he called out, loud enough for everyone. Jolan didn't answer. He rarely did when men poked for a reaction. Hank stepped closer. I hear you've been keeping company with Miss Abigail Cross. Jolan's shoulders moved a fraction, but his back stayed turned. She hired me to show her the river, that's all. That's all, Hank repeated mockingly. You don't fool me. Women like her educated pretty, they don't go wandering after Apache trackers unless they're looking for something special. A couple of men chuckled nervously. Jolan's jaw tightened. The barkeep set down the coffee carefully, watching the tension coil in the air. Sheriff, maybe you ought. I ain't talking to you, Hank snapped, then leaned in close behind Jolan. Abby's mine, always was, and she damn well knows it. Jolan turned at last, slow and controlled. Miss Cross doesn't belong to anyone. Funny thing for a killer for hire to say. You know better than that. Oh, I know plenty. I know you got the townsfolk fooled with your quiet hero act, but underneath, Hank tapped his chest with 2 fingers. You're still savage blood, a rattler hiding in plain sight. The room fell so silent that even the piano player's cheap melody stuttered, then died. Jolon didn't move, but something in the stillness behind his eyes shifted dangerous, cold, but contained. Walk away, Hank, he said. Hank grinned, sensing he'd struck a nerve. Why? Worried you'll lose your temper in front of all these good Christian folks? He grabbed the glass of water from the counter. A heartbeat later, he flipped it. The water splashed over Jolon's head, soaking his hair, his shirt, dripping down the rifle strap. The cold shock made him blink, but he didn't lift a hand. He stood there like a carved figure out of canyon rock. A few gasps rose from the crowd. Someone whispered, "Oh, hell." The humiliation was complete, and Hank knew it. He stepped back with a triumphant smirk. You ain't half the man you pretend to be, he said. Jolon wiped the water from his eyes with the back of his hand. He could have struck Hank then. Could have broken him in one clean motion. He'd done worse to men who deserved less. But if he fought back, Hank would turn the town against him with the same ease he'd toss a match into dry brush. So Jolon did the one thing Hank hadn't expected. He set his hat back on his head, lifted his chin, and walked away. No rush, no anger, just cold dignity. Hank shouted after him, "Run along now, desert dog." Jolon stepped outside into the evening heat, letting the door swing shut behind him. He breathed in slow, steady breaths, as if the night could wash away what water had not. Inside, the saloon erupted in whispered arguments. That was too far. Yeah, but you saw Jolon didn't do nothing. Means Hank owns him. Owns him? That man saved this whole damn town. Maybe so, but a beaten Apache is still an Apache. Best not forget what they can do. Fear, gratitude, prejudice. It all tangled into a messy knot of whispers. And like most knots in Dust River, it traveled fast. By morning, every porch from the general store to the blacksmith had a version of the story. Some folks claimed Jolon begged for mercy. Others claimed he nearly killed Hank. No 2 tales matched, but they all ended with the same conclusion. Hank Collier had put the Apache in his place. Those words reached Abigail before noon. She slammed her notebook shut, stormed down the street, boots kicking up small storms of foot. She found Hank leaning against the sheriff's office porch, half smiling, as though he'd been waiting for applause. "What did you do?" she demanded. He raised his brows. "Afternoon to you too." "Don't play coy with me, Hank. I didn't do anything the man didn't deserve. You're cavorting around with him like he's some kind of gentleman. But I know what Apache men really are. You don't know a damn thing." His smile faded, replaced by something sour. "Funny how protective you sound." Abigail stepped up close, her eyes sharp. "Stay away from him, and stay away from me." The sheriff's badge caught the sunlight as Hank pushed off the railing. "You're making a fool of yourself, Abby. Sticking up for that desert stray. The whole town knows now. I don't care what they know, but I care what you're trying to do." "Oh, you care," he said softly, leaning in. "I can smell it." She recoiled. Hank's expression hardened. "This town is mine," he hissed, "and I won't have you dragging some savage into the middle of it." Abigail walked away without another word, heart pounding, breath sharp. Behind her, the townspeople watched with mixed pity and worry. Dust River was shifting beneath her feet, and she felt it something dark swelling underneath the calm. And somewhere near the riverbed, Jolon stood alone, the sun drying the last traces of yesterday's humiliation, thinking only of her last words to him. "I'd appreciate the truth. Something told him she would need it sooner than either of them expected. The sun rose pale the next morning, a weak coin hanging over Dust River. Abigail found Jalon near the old bridge, exactly where he'd said he would be. He stood with his back to her, scanning the horizon the way only a man trained by danger could. The early light brushed across his shoulders, catching the faint traces of water dried into his shirt from the night before. "Morning," she called quietly. He turned. No bitterness lingered on his face, but there was something heavier there, something withheld. "You didn't have to come," he said. "And you didn't have to let him humiliate you." His jaw flexed. "If I'd fought back, it would have been your story they twisted, not mine." She stepped closer, searching his expression. "I'm sorry. I should have, I don't know, said something, done something." "No." His voice softened. "You're not responsible for the sickness in that man." A breath of cool air drifted from the riverbed, what was left of it. The water had thinned to a sluggish trickle, dark around the stones. Abigail crouched down and trailed her glove through it. The water left a faint white residue. "That's not normal," she said quietly. "No," Jalon agreed. "I saw it 2 nights ago. Didn't think much of it then." Abigail rubbed her fingers together. The residue clung to the fabric like powdered chalk. "Where does the river come in from?" "North Ridge," Jalon said. "Fed by a spring up near the old quarry. Used to be clean." "What changed?" His eyes lowered, thoughtful. "That's what we need to find out." Before he could take another step, a cry carried through the air, thin, panicked, coming from the edge of town. Jalon and Abigail exchanged a glance. Then they ran. A small crowd had gathered near Dylan Harper's barn. Dylan stood by the fence, hat crushed in his hands, eyes frantic. A young steer lay on its side inside the pen, its legs stiff, foam dried at the corners of its mouth. The town's doctor knelt beside the carcass, shaking his head. "Drinking from the river?" Jalon asked. Dylan nodded miserably. "2 days ago. I didn't think nothing of it. Lord help me, I should have known." Dr. Haskins looked up at them. "If the cattle are getting sick, folks won't be far behind." Someone muttered, "Apache poisoning." Another hissed, "That river runs near their camps." A wave of murmurs rolled through the crowd, fear sharpening into suspicion. Abigail's voice rose above it. "This has nothing to do with Apache camps." A few heads snapped toward her. Hank stepped through the circle of people, arms crossed over his badge, as if it were a shield. "Miss Cross," he said with a smile too smooth for the situation. "Always enlightening to hear your opinions." "It's not an opinion," she said. "You've seen this residue on the stones, haven't you?" Hank shrugged casually. "Could be anything. But folks here know what trouble looks like. They've seen it for years." He glanced toward Jalon, as if presenting evidence with nothing more than an eyebrow. Jalon met the stare without flinching. "Whatever's in that river didn't come from my people." "Oh, I know," Hank said. "Pretty sure it came from someone a little closer." His eyes flicked to Abigail. A few people gasped. Abigail's cheeks burned not with embarrassment, but fury. Jalon stepped forward, but she stopped him with a raised hand. "We're going to the river," she said firmly. "Now. We're finding the source of this." Hank smirked. "Be my guest. River's long. Desert's bigger. You two go wander in it long enough. You might never come back." Jalon turned away, without giving Hank the satisfaction of a response. Abigail followed him, her pulse still hot with anger. "You see what he's doing?" she muttered. "He's trying to twist this into something it isn't." "He's trying to make people afraid," Jalon replied. "Afraid men will follow anything." "And you won't?" His eyes met hers. "I follow the land. And the land is sick." They spent the morning hiking along the riverbed. The sun grew vicious, beating down with the kind of heat that dried sweat before it reached the skin. Abigail took notes as they walked the shift in watercolor. Patches where fish had washed ashore, the white dust collecting against stones. At a narrow bend, Jalon crouched. "Boot tracks," he murmured. Abigail leaned in. The prints were sharp, recent size larger than Jalon's, soles thick and squared. "Army issue?" she asked. "Close, but lighter. Mexican border style." "Does Dust River have men using those?" "No," Jalon said slowly, "but I know one man who used to work with smugglers near the border." Abigail stared at him. It didn't take her long to understand. "Hank." Jalon didn't confirm it aloud, but his silence spoke plenty. By late afternoon, the heat pushed them back toward town. Abigail's mind churned with uneasy pieces of a puzzle: poisoned water, cattle dying, strange boot tracks, Hank's growing hostility. As Dust River's buildings rose back into view, she spoke softly. "He's not just angry about us. Something else is happening." Jalon nodded once. "And it's going to get worse before it gets better." But the dry wind carried a faint scent of smoke from the saloon's chimney, and somewhere in that warm haze, Abigail felt Dust River closing its grip around them. Trouble was coming. They both felt it. Neither yet knew how deep it ran. That evening settled heavy over Dust River, one of those slow, breathless dusks where the air felt thick with secrets. Abigail sat at her small boarding house desk, lamp flickering low, sorting through her notes. Every sentence she had written that day circled back to one name: Hank Collier. She didn't want it to be him. She didn't want her past following her across states and deserts. But the river didn't lie. Water carried truth the way wind carried dust. It always left trace. A soft knock sounded on her door. "Miss Cross?" It was Mrs. Dalton, the landlady, kind-faced, always smelling faintly of lavender and frying oil. "You all right, dear? Folks are saying you were with the Apache man today." Abigail set her pencil down. "He has a name. It's Jalon." Mrs. Dalton's eyes darted nervously. "I meant no offense. Just, the sheriff's been stirring talk. Some folks think you were putting yourself in harm's way." "I'm not the one stirring trouble," Abigail replied. Mrs. Dalton sighed, wringing her hands. "Please be careful. Dust River's been quiet for a while, but quiet towns tend to break loud when something goes wrong." Abigail thanked her, but offered no promises. When the landlady left, Abigail exhaled slowly and reached for her notebook again. But then she saw an envelope slipped partly under the door. She hadn't heard anyone place it. A prickle ran down her spine. She picked it up and unfolded the flap. Inside was a single folded letter, official letterhead, from a mining company in El Paso. She scanned the typewritten lines, her heartbeat kicking faster. "To Sheriff Hank Collier, regarding our agreement for exclusive water rights. Shipment will arrive within 2 weeks. Ensure the land is cleared." The signature at the bottom made her chest tighten. The same mining company rumored in Chicago to be involved in poisoning wells near border towns. "He's selling the river," Abigail whispered. She didn't have time to consider how the letter reached her. Someone wanted her to see it. Someone who couldn't risk handing it over in daylight. There was only one person she trusted enough to take it to. The moon hung low over the riverbed, casting sickly silver over the thinning water. Abigail picked her way down the slope, clutching the envelope tightly. She spotted Jalon. Before she reached him, he was crouched by the bank, stirring the water with the end of a stick, watching how the residue swirled. He stood as she approached. "You shouldn't be out here alone after dark," he said. "I'm not alone," she replied, handing him the letter. "Read this." He took it, brows knitting as he scanned the words. The quiet around them thickened like a held breath. "So it's true," he said. He's poisoning the water to drive people away. And framing your people to make it easier. Jolan folded the letter slowly, deliberately. This company Hank worked with men like these on the border years ago. Smugglers, prospectors, men who'd kill a whole town if the land beneath it held something they wanted. That must be why the boot prints looked familiar. He nodded. Hank's not working alone. That's why we need more than a letter. We need proof he's bringing in supplies. Abigail stepped closer, lowering her voice. I think I know where those supplies are kept. Jolan raised a brow. Where? Behind the feed mill. Mrs. Dalton said she heard crates moving in the night. Men she didn't recognize. Then that's where we start. Dust River after midnight was a different creature. Lanterns burned low, horses shifted restlessly in their stalls, and the desert wind moaned against loose shutters like a warning no one wanted to hear. Jolan moved like a shadow, silent, fluid, senses sharpened with old instincts. Abigail followed closely, heart hammering, but she matched his pace with surprising steadiness. The feed mill loomed ahead, dark except for a faint glow leaking from a window in back. Jolan motioned for silence, then peered through a gap in the boards. Inside, crates lined the floor, dozens of them. Abigail's breath caught. Some were marked with the mining company's seal. Others were unmarked, but bore the unmistakable shape of rifles and stacked canisters. Hank's preparing for something big, she whispered. Or someone big, Jolan murmured. He's not planning to just chase folks off. He's preparing a takeover. He slipped to the door and tried the latch. Locked. But Jolan had picked tougher locks in tougher place. Within moments, the door creaked open. Stay close, he whispered. They slipped inside, careful not to disturb the crates. Abigail knelt and pried open a box with a loose lid. Inside were small metal containers, cyanide powder, used in gold extraction. So that's what's poisoning the river, she muttered. Jolan moved to another crate, pushing aside an old tarpaulin. Underneath were ledgers, shipping logs, payment slips, notes scrawled in Hank's handwriting. Take what you can, he said. We'll need these tomorrow. Abigail stuffed papers into her satchel, hands trembling now, not from fear, but from the gravity of what they were uncovering. Then a floorboard creaked. Both froze. Voices, two men outside wolfing, steps crunching in the grit. Boss said to check the back. Heard something earlier. Jolan grabbed Abigail's wrist and pulled her behind a stack of crates. The door handle rattled. Who locked this damn thing? Kick it in. The door crashed inward. Moonlight spilled across the floor as two silhouettes entered, guns drawn. Jolan pressed a finger to Abigail's lips. The men stepped farther inside. Look over there, one muttered. Crates are out of line. Maybe rats. Big damn rats to move a crate. They came closer, too close. Jolan's muscles tensed, ready to strike. But a noise outside, hooves pounding, made the men turn. That the sheriff? Let's go. They hurried out, slamming the door behind them. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Abigail sagged against the crate, breath unsteady. That was too close, she whispered. This isn't over, Jolan said softly. When Hank learns someone's been in here, he'll make his move, and the town will believe him. For now. He handed her the ledger. Tomorrow you show the truth. And Hank? A shadow passed across Jolan's face. I'll handle him. They left the feed mill under a moon half hidden by clouds. Far off, a coyote cried a long, lonely sound that made Abigail shiver. Dust River slept, unaware of the storm gathering just beneath its feet. But morning was coming fast. And with it, a reckoning. Dawn broke sharp and colorless, painting Dust River in a cold gray that smothered even the birdsong. People stirred early, not for chores, not for church, but for something darker. Word had spread like brush fire through the alleys and porches. Sheriff Collier caught the Apache poisoning the river. Execution at first light. The town hadn't seen a hanging since the Whitlock gang. Folks came clutching fears like blankets, hoping a show of justice might quiet them. But justice is a thin mask in a frightened town. And behind that mask waited men like Hank. The gallows had been dragged out from storage and erected in the center of the square, a crude, splintered thing that looked too eager for use. Hank stood near it, boots planted wide, badge gleaming beneath the rising sun. Every bit the picture of law and authority he wanted them to believe. Jolan knelt in the dust below the platform, wrists bound, ankles tied. His shirt bore dried blood from the scuffle during his staged arrest. 2 deputies men Hank had brought from outside, not locals, stood watch at his sides. His face was calm, too calm. Abigail recognized the kind of calm that only came before a storm. She pushed through the crowd, her satchel heavy with the ledgers, letters, and shipping slips she and Jolan had stolen the night before. Her heart beat like a fist against her ribs. Dust River watched her with varying shades of pity, suspicion, or plain fear. Mrs. Dalton whispered, "Child, don't do anything foolish." "This town's already done enough foolish," Abigail replied. Hank noticed her before she reached the platform. A smile, slow, venomous, curled across his mouth. "Morning, Abby. Fine day for setting things right." "What you're setting is a trap," she said. His eyes darkened. "Be careful, darling. Folks here are scared. They need someone to blame." "You already picked your someone," she shot back, "and he fits nicely." Hank stepped up onto the platform. The crowd hushed. He raised his hands the way a preacher might, before a sermon. "People of Dust River," he began, "we've had sickness in our water, fear in our homes, and strangers stir in trouble. But fear ends today." He pointed at Jolan. "This man, this Apache mercenary, was caught red-handed sabotaging our water supply." Gasps rippled outward. Jolan lifted his gaze, meeting Abigail's across the square. Not pleading, not angry, just steady, inviting her to finish what they started. She stepped forward. "That's a lie." Head snapped toward her. Hank's glare sharpened. "Miss Cross," he said, voice low with warning. Abigail pulled a folded letter from her satchel. "I have proof that Hank Collier is behind the poisoning." A shock went through the crowd like a wire jolted with current. Hank stiffened. "That's enough," he barked. But Abigail kept going. "He's working with a mining company in El Paso. He's poisoning the river to force folks off their land, so he can sell Dust River's water rights for profit." "You watch your mouth, Abby," Hank growled. "You're hysterical." "Am I?" She held up the mining agreement signed by Hank. Gasps rose again. Jolan's bindings tightened around his wrists as he shifted slightly, not to flee, but to prepare. Something in the air crackled, like lightning about to strike. Hank shot his arm out. "Deputies, seize her." The 2 hired men moved, but Jolan moved faster. In a flash, he rolled onto his back, twisting his legs around one deputy's ankles. The man hit the ground hard. Before the second deputy could react, Jolan kicked upward, planting a blow into the man's knee. The crack echoed sharply. Chaos erupted. Some townsfolk screamed. Others backed away, afraid of what they'd unleashed. Dust clouds swirled, blurring the edges of everything. Hank reached for his gun. Jolan lunged. Even with wrists bound, he struck like the desert cat he'd been trained to be. His shoulder slammed into Hank's ribs, sending both men tumbling off the platform. The rope brushed Jolan's cheek as it swung wildly overhead. Abigail ran forward, hands shaking but determined. She grabbed the dagger from a deputy's belt and sliced through the ropes at Jolan's wrists. Hank staggered to his feet, wild-eyed, gun raised. "Get away from him, Abby," he roared. Jolon stepped between them. "No," she said. "You get away from him." "You stupid woman," Hank spat. "You don't know what you're doing. This town needs order. It needs the truth," Abigail cut in. "It needs a sheriff who doesn't poison children," Jolon added, voice deep as canyon stone. Hank's finger tightened on the trigger. Jolon didn't wait. With a swift move, he kicked Hank's hand, sending the gun skittering across the ground. Hank lunged, tackling him. The two rolled through the dirt, fists swinging, crowd circling, but too shocked to interfere. Hank fought like a man, desperate to keep the truth buried wild, uncontrolled. Jolon fought like a man who'd known real violence and had no room for carelessness. Hank swung a broken bottle. It sliced across Jolon's shoulder. Jolon seized Hank's wrist, twisted hard, and forced him to the ground. He pinned him with a knee between the shoulder blades. The sheriff thrashed. "Let me up, you savage!" Jolon leaned close, voice calm. A savage wouldn't have stopped. Abigail arrived beside them, breathing hard. She dropped the ledger and papers at Hank's face. "Your lies are done," she said. Several townsfolk crept closer, examining the documents. Don Harper, the rancher whose steer had died, turned the pages with wide eyes. This is real," he whispered. "These are orders for cyanide shipments." Another man muttered, "He was selling us out." Fear turned to fury. Fury turned to disgust. The crowd's mood snapped like a rope under too much strain. Hank's final fight left him then. He sagged in the dirt, panting, eyes darting desperately. "It was business. You don't understand." Jolon hauled him upright. "You will answer to the law, the real law." People began nodding. Abigail lifted her chin, meeting the crowd's gaze. Dust River deserves better. For the first time in hours, silence fell. But it was not the silence of fear. It was the breath before rebuilding. Deputies stepped forward. Local deputies this time, not Hank's men. They took Hank by the arms and led him away, as he sputtered curses into the wind. The gallows loomed overhead, empty now, a relic of what almost be Oi. Abigail stepped to Jolon. His shoulder bled freely, but he barely seemed to feel it. "You okay?" she whispered. He nodded. "Because you came." Dust River watched them with new eyes. Not fear, not suspicion, but awakening gratitude. And for the first time since the river began to sicken, hope trickled into town like the first cool drops after a long drought. Dust River exhaled as if waking from a fevered dream. The morning air still held the bitter tang of fear, but beneath it was something cleaner, uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. Hank Collier was locked in the town's small jail now, wrists cuffed, eyes hollow. The mining documents lay in the sheriff's office, no longer hidden, but pinned up for all to see. His power, once so sharp it could cut a room in half, hung limp beside him like a dead snake. A quiet crowd gathered along Main Street as two federal marshals arrived at sundown. They read Hank his formal charges, while Dust River watched some with grim satisfaction, some with cynicism. But no one objected when he was led away in irons. The gallows stood untouched, empty, its shadow thin and useless across the dirt. Abigail found Jolon standing near the old bridge later that evening. The sun dropped low behind him, painting his silhouette in gold and copper. He had a strip of cloth tied around his shoulder, where Hank's bottle had cut him, but he stood upright, without strain. "You should be resting," she said as she approached. His lips curved faintly. "I've rested enough for one lifetime." She joined him at the rail of the bridge, the wood warm beneath her palms. The river below was quieter today, its thin current weaving around stones as if searching for its own strength. "They're starting cleanup," she said. "Dr. Haskins and some of the ranch hands are hauling clean sand from the North Ridge. Once we show them how to pack the banks, the water will stay filtered. Jolan nodded toward the slope where men worked under the fading sun. Good people. They were misled, not lost. Abigail didn't disagree. She had seen fear warp decent men before. This time, truth had come before bloodshed. "You'll stay to help them?" she asked. "For a while, till the water runs clear." "And after?" He looked at her, then really looked. Not the watchful, measured gaze he'd given her at the stagecoach, nor the protective one she'd seen during Hank's rage, but something gentler, older, as if he were tracing the shape of a choice he hadn't yet spoken aloud. "After," he said slowly, "the land will decide where I go." Abigail smiled, though something tightened in her chest. "That sounds like you." A silence settled between them, but not the uncomfortable kind. The desert around them hummed with cicadas rising for the night. Lamps flickered to life along Main Street. A horse snorted from the livery. Dust River, exhausted, was still Dust River, stubborn, cracked at the edges, but alive. Jolan shifted, drawing something from his pocket. A small leather pouch. He placed it in her hand. "What's this?" she asked. "From the river," he said, "before the poison spread. Stones that carry the sound of running water when you shake them." She lifted the pouch, hearing the faint rattle, a delicate whisper, like pebbles brushing each other in a shallow stream. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "You saved more than my life today," he said quietly. "You saved my people's honor, and your own." "Jolan, I didn't do it for honor." "I know." He stepped a little closer, shadow touching hers. "You wrote truth when others turned their faces from it." She felt her breath catch, though the air between them was cool. "I'm not finished writing." "Then keep writing. Dust River needs someone who sees clearly." She glanced out over the water. For the first time since she arrived, the river didn't seem tired. Hurt, yes, but healing, like the town itself. "Jolan," she said softly, "if the land doesn't call you too far, you know where to find me." His eyes flickered surprise or hope, or maybe both. "I do." Footsteps sounded behind them. Mrs. Dalton approached, wiping her hands on her apron, eyes still red from earlier. "Miss Cross, Mr. Jolan. Folks are setting out supper behind the boarding house. There's plenty if you want some." Jolan nodded respectfully. Abigail smiled. "We'll come soon, Mrs." Dalton hesitated, then laid a gentle hand on Jolan's arm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on us." His voice was quiet. "People lose their way. Doesn't mean they can't find it again." She blinked away tears and left them with a trembling smile. Abigail watched her go, then turned back to Jolan. "Seems folks are seeing you differently now." "They see what fear kept them from seeing," he replied, "but I don't hold it against them. And Hank? He'll answer for what he did. That's enough." They walked together along the river's edge, evening deepening around them. The water glimmered faintly in the starlight, moving slow but sure. Jolan reached out and steadied Abigail when she slipped on a loose stone. Her hand lingered in his, and he didn't let go until she found her footing. "You ever think of staying somewhere for good?" she asked. He considered it. "A man like me don't always get to choose, but sometimes." His gaze moved to her. "Sometimes the land gives you a reason." Her heartbeat softened into something warm. "And is Dust River one of those reasons?" "It might be." The desert night wrapped around them vast, star-pinned, full of the weight and promise of open land. Abigail felt the world tilt, just slightly, as if the future had eased its grip and left a path open before them. Jolan lifted his chin toward town. "Come, let's eat." She nodded. Together, they walked back toward the lantern glow of Dust River, two silhouettes side by side, leaving behind the poisoned past stepping toward something neither of them had planned for, but both had begun to hope for. And behind them, the river whispered along its banks, carrying the sound of healing water through the heart of a town finally ready to listen.